facts. Crime is at an all-time low.
Are you saying that the agency sanctions corruption and will continue to do so as long as they get results? How far is the agency
What I'm saying is...
Crackdown was a refreshing take on the open world scene when it was first released back in 2007. It introduced players to a world of superhuman cops versus criminals. It was in a league all of its own, and it still is one of the most underrated games of this generation. Now after 3 years, there is finally a sequel to this game, but does it do the series justice and improve over the original?
This is the voice of the agency. I'm your handler for this mission. I'll monitor your progress and keep you on track.
Let's go ahead and get the graphics out of the way. It is hard to say this, but the original Crackdown has superior character models. In the second Crackdown, the agents are pretty boring to look at in comparison to the old ones. The performance also suffers where the first Crackdown did not. Most notably, at times where there is almost nothing going on, you'll notice a good amount of performance lag. It's somewhat confusing how a game made in 2007 of the same nature is visually superior to a sequel of the same name.
This is all the welcome we get from Cell, the most dangerous gang Pacific City has ever seen.
If you've ever played Crackdown 1 for even a second, you've played Crackdown 2 already. The controls are exactly the same as its predecessor, and if you've never played the original, things are fairly simple to get into. Most of the time you'll only use 4 buttons, because you'll be jumping, shooting, and kicking most of your enemies into oblivion. It's still just as much fun to wreak havoc in Crackdown 2 as it was in Crackdown 1. You'll spend most of your time hunting for agility orbs, beating down mobs of freaking zombies, and wrecking Cell strongholds. Each of your abilities can level up based on how you use them. So if you're spending most of your time in the car completing races and mowing down enemies, you'll gain orbs that will increase your experience in driving. The same goes for using firearms, melee, and explosives. Eventually, you'll become a superhero when you've maxed everything out. So you'll be leaping tall buildings in a single bound, picking up cars and throwing them at your enemies, and taking explosives to the chest without flinching. This also ramps up the difficulty of your opponents too. As you gain upgrades, so will they. So the Cell faction will start to use more dangerous weapons and come out in greater force, while the freaks will mutate into larger or more agile versions to chase you down. Add in the fact that you can play with 3 people over Xbox Live and you've got some fun times ahead. The game drastically changes when you're bounding across rooftops with friends, hitting each other with melee attacks, or have one player flying a chopper while you take the ground. These moments are when Crackdown 2 are the most fun to play. In fact, I recommend playing with friends as much as possible while the game is in the system. That's not saying that it isn't perfectly fine while playing solo, but having other players adds a much more satisfying and social element. There are also some player versus player matches to participate in, from Rocket Tag, which is basically what it sounds like. Kill the player holding the orb before the time limit is up, to the standard fair deathmatch and team deathmatch. These modes are really basic, but if you have the need for superhero combat against your friends, it is there for you. Now for the problems that I have with this game, which are things that you think would be fixed in a sequel. The number one problem would be that of the targeting system. A good amount of the time, the lock-on system will target anything but what you actually want to shoot. The second issue I have with this game is that they've really added nothing to spice up getting around town. After playing games like Assassin's Creed and Infamous, I just found myself annoyed with how much trouble it was to get around the city. Even though the game hasn't changed much from the first one, the gameplay still holds up very well 3 years later. I can't actually recommend this game at a $60 price tag unless you have 3 other players willing to leap around Pacific City with you. Though seeing as there have already been some deals with the game under $45, I would suggest grabbing it at that price. If you can and just want to cause a little mayhem as a superhuman cop, I can recommend this game as a rent. So Crackdown 2 receives a C from Half-Ass Gaming, and let the good times roll.
The beacon's good to go, Agent. It's gonna be a hot time in the old town tonight.